Whilst many of the stories in Colin Baker's early adventures have had some flaws, I haven't as yet seen anything that would warrant more criticism than any other era of the series. Season 22 takes the series into a much more mature direction, with a lot of harsh themes that may not be pretty to look at, but are as valid and intriguing as anything we've seen in the past. We certainly haven't seen such dark ideas explored so regularly, and perhaps some audiences were finding the lack of lighter, whimsical aspects a little draining. But is there anything bad here? Well, take a look at the Twin Dilemma, an exceptional case, a victim of what is perhaps a misjudged decision, to end the series with a new Doctor's first adventure following the Caves of Androzani, as well as behind-the-scenes production issues. Yes, its ambition far outstretches its resources, but so does most of the 1960s and most of Doctor Who. Timelash is the only story that I would consider to be bad. That is not to say anyone intended it to be bad. Yes, again, it suffers from ambition outstretching resources, but more so than other stories. That and its story is pretty poor. At its core is a script that really struggles to fill its runtime amongst other problems, but that is what happens when you give an inexperienced writer 4 episodes to fill. But every era has its dud story. The Jon Pertwee era has The Time Monster, the Tom Baker era has Underworld. There are loads of them out there. But Timelash may well be a favourite for someone. To them, it may be Doctor Who. But let's move on to more positive things. This is Nerd World Problems, things that matter to awesome people. Revelation of the Daleks now, largely regarded as probably the best 6th Doctor story, and possibly one of the best Doctor Who stories full stop. By this point, I'm feeling I understand more what the production team's vision was for this series. Revelation pretty much sums it up, and it should do, as it was written by Eric Saywood, who was also script editor at the time. It balances out these very challenging themes while still quite quintessentially feeling like Doctor Who. Whilst Revelation doesn't include as many facets of ideas, it does have a very focused idea at its core, and it uses that as a great basis for a story. At a basic level, it's about death. In Revelation, this develops into both an exploration of what the dead mean to us. Are these simply cadavers, the physical remains of the great and the good to be revered, respected, and preserved in perpetuity? And also, if a facility was constructed on that basis, how could it be perverted by someone who, for whatever reason, had a use for the dead? This in its own right is a concept that would make your skin crawl. It's hard to tell whether the inclusion of the Daleks benefits or detracts from this, but thankfully the Daleks are incidental. This is all about Davros, and is probably the best use and portrayal of the character since Genesis. Suffice to say though, that even if it wasn't Davros leading, the story would still be pretty good. At least the inclusion of Davros, and by association with Daleks, it does at least make the idea appealing to the mass audience. This is probably Terry Malloy's finest hour of Davros outside of Big Finish. Saywood's writing and Malloy's performance really flesh out Davros as a three-dimensional character rather than just the creator of the Daleks. You believe in Davros as a person. He uses wit and sarcasm. He experiences frustration, bitterness and pride amongst the ranting and raving we have come to expect. He is motivated and has an objective to make another stab at creating the Daleks through deceit, manipulation and deviousness, and all to the same end, for ultimate power and control. Also, how disturbing is it to hear Davros discussing something as mundane but also vulgar as money? It oddly makes him relatable and down to earth, but also desperate, as he has to rely on finance to make his vision a reality. He is really in a position of weakness, as suggested by the fact that he is a disembodied head. What is also brilliant about this story is the interplay with the Doctor. Now sadly, the Doctor and Perry are largely sidelined for the majority of the story. In fact, the whole first episode sees them cut off from all the other characters in the story. But when the Doctor does finally face Davros, both characters really come into their own. Their scenes feature such sparkling dialogue and such superb interplay that it is a tragedy that we never saw this on screen again. This is probably the 6th Doctor's finest hour. You really feel that these are two men that are a match in different ways, yet totally opposed ideologies. But there is an underlying respect for one another. Let me put it this way, in these scenes you completely forget the Doctor's costume. In fact, you forget pretty much everything around them. It's so immersive. Perry, however, sadly spends most of the episode fending off the lecherous Jobel and then fending off the Daleks using the DJ's rock and roll beam. There is a lot of criticism levelled at Eric Sayward for ripping off Robert Holmes by having the story populated by double acts. I don't see this as a problem. The way I see it, I would rather have two fully fleshed out characters with an established dynamic and relationship rather than one character with no one to talk to, or one character getting all the best bits and a walking doormat that just fulfills a particular role to a certain degree. It's two for the price of one when you think about it, and each character has someone to riff off, which is so much more satisfying, and we got to know each of these characters as well as each other. The most successful by far is Orsini and Bostock, who I would say get the bulk of the action in this story to the point where you could feasibly remove the Doctor and Perry altogether, at least definitely in the first part, and still have a strong and coherent story with a hero at the heart of it and his sidekick. It's a shame that this is their only appearance in the series. Big finish, anyone? Please? The Daleks themselves, like the Doctor, they get a bit of a rough deal. They are mostly eye candy and henchmen for Davros, however that is largely the point of Davros' Mark II models, to make them completely subservient, as it's the original Daleks' independence that made them turn against him. The real Daleks are introduced far too late in the story to provide an effective contrast and much of a threat, and even then they don't really do much aside from knocking out a few of the new Daleks. It's really hard to perceive the Daleks as much of a threat, especially in an environment where most of the inhabitants are either dead already or already Daleks, although seeing Daleks blow up is always fun, even if it does diminish them slightly. It's the concept behind the Daleks essentially that takes precedence here, i.e. their effective sterility and inability to breed, and resorting to recycling corpses, and the scene with the glass Dalek is a chillingly graphic exploration of that notion, which gives the whole story some extra weight. What doesn't quite give the Daleks the necessary gravitas is the fact that their voices have been changed and now sound like Zippy from Rainbow on Helium. This story would require very little amendment to make it work in the current series. It has a strong and captivating idea at its core, which I believe would be regarded as possibly one of the best. It also goes without saying that everything looks great. Graham Harper's direction is superbly atmospheric, and it's great to see effort made to bring the lighting levels down to almost complete darkness at times where it's appropriate. It hides a multitude of sins that might otherwise distract from a very fine story. I hope you've enjoyed this episode by episode analysis of the Sixth Doctor. Please let me know your thoughts about the character in the comment section below, and if you want to see more videos like this. In the meantime, please check out my blog, Nerd World Problems, at drtripod.wordpress.com, where you can find typed up versions of each of these episodes.